everybody, what is up? It's Chris Duncan again with another edition of the Daily Duncan, and have two guests today. So I'm very excited to talk with Michelle Schumacher and Shawn Gordon about the Transportation Corridor Agencies. A lot of people don't know the name. A lot of people know TCA. That's what it stands for. So this is going to be a little bit different because we're going to get into that specific subject, and really excited to talk to these two prevalent members of the community about it. And you know, I was told by a good friend that I talk too much in the beginning and that I say too much. So I'm going to try and cut down on that and get right to it. But just a little intro. Michelle Schumacher is the co-founder of Not My Toll Road. She lives in San Clemente, as do I. I've met her before during my campaign for state assembly, and she is essentially the resource on the TCA and particularly the toll road projects that were contemplated for going through San Clemente. And Shawn Gordon is 22 years, I think, in Rancho Santa Margarita, RSM as it's commonly known. So you were there almost at the beginning, I think, Shawn. I love RSM. It's where one of my favorite deli restaurants is. Scott's out there. I don't know if you've been there, but that's a great spot. I love getting out there. And so, yeah, so thank you very much for coming, both of you today.
Sure.
All right, now with that, again, let's get right to it. Michelle, could you give us a little background on the TCA, along with, where does it come from? How was it formed? What's it intended to do? And why did you get involved in TCA issues?
Well, I grew up in San Clemente, went from elementary school through high school, and the TCA, or toll roads, is a government agency that has had their eyes on our state park, our San Onofre State Park and Trestles for the past 20 years. They thought it would be a good idea to put a toll road through a state park, which would clearly be detrimental for both Orange County and San Diego County, who enjoys that resource and having the open space and the variety of birds and our beautiful beach that we have down there. So, you know, my dislike of the toll road started early on, and they settled with the environmental groups in December of 2016, and we thought, gosh, this is wonderful. They're going to go away and stop harassing our city. Well, it couldn't have been further from the truth. They came up with a spaghetti map of 24 different alternatives, all which were completely moronic. I mean, there wasn't a route in there that made any sense. They were all so damaging, going by 6 different schools. There wasn't going to be a public high school available for our kids that was not under a toll road. So it just seemed really important to get involved at that point, to stand up and protect what we love and our communities. So we started going to meetings. They're tragically boring up in Irvine. You have to leave 3 minutes early to avoid taking the toll road. But so we've been, going for the last 4 years. And what we discovered about this government agency that's formed as a joint powers agreement between the County of Orange and the cities that are member cities is that it should be totally corrupt agency, because the TCA is not only funneling money for political purposes through nonprofits controlled by the same few people, but they also spend $5,000 on golf games, $35,000 dinners. They rent out the coach house to see who at the TCA and their small little group has talent. It's not an acceptable.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think people might be surprised. They may not know that the TCA is a government agency. I think a lot of people may think it's some kind of a business, but that's not usually the things that government agencies do, right? Is that kind of spending on consultants and golf games and things like that, right? So then it sort of operates a little bit more like a business.
You'd hope so.
Yeah, and let's get back to the beginning, though. What was it originally formed to do? What was the TCA formed to do? I know that there were 2 toll roads, the 73 and the 241, which you have there. And how long were those tolls supposed to last before they became untolled?
So it was very clear that this TCA, the Joint Powers Authority, was for a 30-year period. Back in the 80s, Orange County was mostly orange groves. So Rancho Mission Viejo and the Irvine Company wanted to develop Orange County, but they couldn't get Sacramento's attention for infrastructure. So this was the brainchild of, how do we develop Orange County when we're being ignored for infrastructure. So they came up with the TCA. It's a single purpose entity to build the toll roads, pay down the bonds, and go away. So the problem is their debt has going way over the cost of construction, and now they're trying to have mission creep to toll not only our freeway, but to fund roads for private developers such as Rancho Mission Viejo with Route 22 that they just decided on, that comes straight to San Clemente's doorstep. So we've got a problem with this agency. It's pretty much gone rogue.
And you mentioned this. Why has the TCA's debt grown? Right. I think over time it was supposed to go down. The idea is to pay off these bonds that they got to build these roads. Right. And like I mentioned before, it's supposed to be paid off so that eventually the roads will be free. It's just another way to build the roads other than using direct taxpayer money. What has happened that the opposite has happened, and that the debt has grown over time instead of being paid down?
Well, the consultants, pretty much lobbyists and consultants, they employ an army of lobbyists and consultants, and they're on retainer whether they're working or not. Some get $6,000 a month. There's a newspaper article that came out in the LA Times, and $230,000 last year was spent. $185 an hour for one consultant to read the news. Well, they were billing for 26-hour work days. There's just absolutely no board input. Historically, there's been no board input. The lobbyists have been running the show, and it's been just a huge cash cow. They've got the development fees coming in, $28 million in tolls, penalties alone last year, plus the toll revenue. It's just, no one's been watching what they've been doing. And they just ousted another CEO a month ago, and he was making almost $500,000, and he manages less than 90 people. It's ridiculous.
So yeah, I want to talk about those developer impact fees in a second with Shawn. I'll probably turn it over to him. But what about ridership, right? Wasn't the ridership supposed to support the revenue such that they would be getting enough revenue in, leaving aside these other expenses, which we can discuss? But what about the revenue that's coming in from the tolls? Has there been a problem there?
It really has been. We've looked at everything. There was a very well-written Pacific Research Institute report done several years ago that concluded their business model has been unsustainable from the start, but they've also had to increase their projections and ridership levels to be able to get the bond girls and boys interested in issuing the bonds. So everything's inflated to get these bonds initially, and the projections still to this day have never been met.
Well, I can tell you from driving on them every so often, they're never crowded.
Yeah.
You know that. I think even less these days, right? With the coronavirus, I think if anything, that revenue has gone down even more. Hey, Shawn, let's talk about these developer impact fees. I think a lot of people don't know a ton about them. Maybe they've heard the reference, but I think maybe they might be surprised about what those are and how that functions in terms of a revenue source for the TCA.
Sure, I just pulled up some numbers here to make sure I'm correct. It is on the TCA site, but to one of your final points there, ridership on the toll roads right now is down about 70%. So they're on a fast track to bankrupt. So developer impact fee has been going on for a long time. And it's a fee that's assessed for any new construction. And it depends on where you're at in terms of the service area. So the TCA decided who is part of their service area based on where they're at in relation to a toll. And you might be right next to the freeway. So for example, in Irvine, all through Irvine, you're sitting right next to the 5 or 405. It's $4,200 a house. And for a business, it's $4.77 a square foot. Now, where I live out in Rancho, it's nearly $6,000 a house and $8.25 a square foot. And what's fascinating with these fees, so whenever development, so Rancho has very little room left to develop. Actually, we literally have none. So we paid, I think it was $50,000 in developer impact fees a couple of years ago, but nothing last year because nothing was. But there's been 2 instances of rezoning a commercial area to residential here in town, to high density residential, and that generated fees for the TCA. And we've got something going on right now with a shopping center that they're trying to get rezoned, and that will result in another grand for the TCA. So when I was talking to one of the city councilmen about this a couple of years ago, and keep in mind, he's been on city council almost nonstop since we became a city in 2000. One of our city councilmen, like other city councils, same guy has been on the TCA board, for a decade, Tony Beal. So he comes back and he reports every month. Not to turn it into a political thing, this is an informative thing. So these city councilmen, they sit on the TCA board, they're on the meetings, they come back and they report back. And this guy who was mayor at the time, he had never heard of these. He had no idea. We were talking this rezone project, and I said, and it's going to be this and this. He's like, are you just making that up, or is that a real thing? I'm like, you really have to develop these? So I sent him a link to the TCA site, because part of disclosure, they have to have it there. You can click on their interactive map. You can see what it costs. You can do calculations yourself whenever they're talking about number of units that they're going to build. Like the Laguna Hills Mall, you go and look at it. If they redo the Laguna Hills Mall, it's $4,500 a unit. If they redo the over in Lake Forest, they're talking about redoing this nursery, that's going to be $4,200 a unit.
All right. So where does so as I understand it, there's developer impact fees that are collected along any real freeway or large public road. That's because we want to support the traffic being able to get to these businesses. And that's what happens with the TCA. You pointed out it's a lot higher for the toll roads that the TCA manages. How does that money go from being collected, and how is it passed on to perhaps members of the public?
So what happens is, let's say they build this thing over here and it's $100,000 in developer impact fees. They give it to the city of Rancho, and Rancho passes it on completely and directly to the TCA. Rancho doesn't take a penny of it. I don't believe they even get an administrative fee for it. They just pass it straight on. And if you think about it, we're getting nailed multiple times on these toll roads. We pay to drive on the toll roads. In some cases, it's part of your Mello-Roos. It was part of mine. And you have the developer impact fee. So, you're getting taxed multiple times for something that was never approved by the state legislature as a tax.
Right. And that overtaxing, right, or that extra tax is a really interesting sort of part of this whole picture for me, along with perhaps the corruption that's going on in the agency. When I was at Homeland Security, we did investigations into companies that were acting fraudulently, and we did investigations into government agencies that were wasteful and not being good stewards of the taxpayer money. And that's an area there that I feel like should be really bipartisan, right? Like I'm a nonpartisan person. I don't lead with politics on anything that I talk about. And that's why I really like this issue, right? So it seems to me what you're saying is the bottom line is we in South Orange County are getting overtaxed by this agency for what the bargain was that we were supposed to get in the beginning, right? As an example, those fees, that makes our real estate cost more. We pay more for our residential real estate, and businesses pay more for their business real estate because of these developer impact fees that go right through the city. City doesn't get any of it, right to the DCA.
And then that raises fees to you as a consumer. You're going to the chiropractor or whatever. They had to pay these extra fees, so they need, pay for that. Because for business, if you're talking $8 a square foot, that adds up really fast. Yes. That is a non-trivial amount of money.
And that construction cost is passed directly onto the consumer.
Absolutely.
All right. So I've got up there again, Michelle, I talk about that people have seen this sign, right? No toll road through San Clemente. Now, a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple months ago now, it's hard to, with coronavirus, you lose track of time. But, I remember the announcement. It was actually right after the primary election, or right around that time, that, hey, everybody, we're not going to be doing the toll road through San Clemente, all these options that you talked about, the spaghetti map of different potential options for a new toll road to connect the 241. We're not going to do that, TCA announced. Now we're going to build an untolled road on Las Patronas. Now, I thought that was it. Party's over. We don't need to be worried about the TCA anymore. No more worried about toll road through San Clemente. Is that true, or should we still be concerned?
I am terrified. They've essentially, I've been listening to all of the committee meetings, and the TCA directors have essentially stacked the OCTA board. And they are going to, if you think about the settlement agreement that protects the park, OCTA is the only transportation agency who's not excluded from building through the park. So if you connect Route 22 to La Plata, which is what they decided to do, it's just another continued illegal segment of the 241. And then they can extend it further in another segment, you know, up La Plata and through the park, or potentially down by Pico, depending on what happens with Pat Bates's legislation. So I don't think that it's time to celebrate. I think that we were kind of sold under the bridge by a few unscrupulous people and a crappy deal they took. So we are going to remain vigilant until we know, you know, that they have been stopped.
Well, to that point, and you just shared this morning, Michelle, the last meeting, TCA, like 2 weeks ago, they're talking about, because Senator Bates and Assemblyman Breaux both have bills in to essentially codify what the TCA just agreed to, which was to stop. So all it was is to put it in legislation. You're done. You stop. And guess what they're discussing at the meeting? Sending letters to the state to argue against the bills. They want to make sure that they stay in front of that and they don't get caught flat-footed. These are their exact words. You can listen to it. It's online, where they're discussing how to keep those bills from going through. They just agreed to do it like 3 weeks ago.
In other words, is there any guarantee that they don't convert it to a toll road down the road?
No, and a TCA director was very forthcoming with me and said, you know, right now we're voting to proceed with an untolled road, which the TCA only builds toll roads, but another board could undo that vote later. So there's nothing to really be excited about other than we're not fighting 9 routes right now. We know that this is just another segment that they're building for a private developer out in the middle of nowhere that apparently is great traffic relief because there's nothing out there, and it should all be good now. But it's really not. It's just some more dishonesty from a bad agency.
I mean, think about the logistics of that segment, okay? And I live here, and when I first moved here, that was when the toll roads were first starting to open up, and they were free, and then it was like a quarter to go on, and now, of course, it's like, you know, $10. But think about the traffic. To go south, the bulk of the traffic come from Rancho Santa Margarita, okay? Very little from Foothill Ranch necessarily, maybe some, but they won't give you the numbers of the exits at OSA, which I asked them for. They're like, oh yeah, we have those right at our fingertips. And I was at the office in December, and can you get me the reports? I want to see the traffic reports of getting off here. What is the traffic flow? So they built that road, they put the toll transponders on it while it was supposed to be a free road. They just built it next to a high school. That's a whole other story. But think about the traffic. If for it to relieve any sort of traffic between the El Toro Y and San Clemente, that would mean people would have to get on the toll road, go east, then take it all the way south. This is going to cost them probably $8 to $10 to connect back up in San Clemente, adding something like 15 miles to their trip. I mean, who's going to do that?
Right.
Like nobody.
So it's more about building the road than actually alleviating traffic or, you know, performing some other public service.
Yeah, there's literally no traffic there. And when I met with them, I made a couple of suggestions because there's some construction going on right now. And I'm like, you guys can earn a lot of goodwill by getting rid of the toll during the school hours, you know, an hour in the morning, hour in the evening between Rancho or just the exit at Oso, because the traffic is so horrible, people can't get through with that construction. I'm like, just till summer. This is in December. I'm like, just do it for those, 5-6 months. I go, get the number so you know what you're going to lose in traffic, because it's going to be trivial. Nobody goes that direction. They can't buy that amount of goodwill. And they're like, well, nobody's asking for it. It's like, no, you guys just, they don't know what they're talking about. They didn't even know where it got off in Rancho Mission Viejo. Their maps on their walls are so old. Yeah. They thought that there was no way to get from Santa Margarita Parkway to Antonio Parkway in Rancho. They thought that you had to take the toll exit No, there's roads all over the place. There were none on the maps in the wall. They literally don't know anything about the area. They've never driven the roads. When I told them it ends in the middle of a city, like you're 8 miles from getting to a highway where it ends now, they're like, oh, really? Maybe I should drive on that. Yeah, you think?
All right, so Michelle, why is it so important to the TCA to be building new construction, right? Like, or adding new toll roads? Why are they so bent on this when the toll roads that they were responsible have already largely been built? What is it about this new construction that they're so interested in doing?
Well, I think it's probably two-pronged. We found in some past minutes and reports that if they didn't continue to build, that some bonds would be due. So if they can continue construction, then they can kind of avoid the bonds that were going to become due if they were not in a construction phase.
So replacing new old debt with new debt.
Yes, and they've been refinancing every chance they get to pay the least amount possible for a payment, which you don't want to do with capital appreciation bonds because they are a pretty scary bond vehicle down the road. But we've looked closely at their financials, and they've got 3 times more debt than assets. So I think that if they're just trying to keep going because it's a pretty good gig at the TCA. They're having a great time and making a lot of money, and they're not doing anything. I mean, it's all electronic tolling. They travel, they go out for, this one guy has a job where he goes out for lunch every day and has sea bass quite often. I mean,
hey,
sign me up.
You mentioned this. What happens if the TCA does go bankrupt, right? I mean, their debt's growing over time instead of going down. What happens if it goes bankrupt? Who's responsible for that?
Okay, so the Orange County grand jury in 2014 issued a solvency warning to the TCA because they hold 64% of joint power authority agreements in Orange County. The TCA says continuously that they do not use our taxpayer dollars, which is a lie. They use local, state, and federal tax dollars. They use grant money. Caltrans maintains the roads for them. I believe that taxpayers are on the hook for this. They have got it in writing that apparently we're not, but the implications for our county and our state are pretty devastating. If this COVID situation goes on too long, or if people start working from home, they've never had a sound business model. I mean, you can't put toll roads next to free roads. People are going to avoid the toll roads at all costs, unless if their demographic is for a 50-year-old white man who's employed and owns homes. So,
well, they've never hit a single financial projection, not even close. And they like to tout, we have an A bond rating. Well, it was an A minus, and the way the bond ratings work, it's a scale of 10. And A minus is 7 out of 10, with 10 being the lowest. And now I believe they're triple B minus, which is the last.
Okay.
yeah.
Not surprising. All right. Well, hey, look, Shawn, you ran for city council, I think, before, right? In Republican Central Committee.
Yeah.
What can our elected officials do, right? They're distracted right now. They're focusing on other things with the COVID-19 going on, but it seems to be still an important issue. What is something that elected officials can do, and people can advocate to their elected officials to do to rein in the TCA, or to try to get the TCA wound down or acting more responsibly? That's for both of you.
Well, I believe in general, so each city that's involved has a representative to the board, and there's some representatives who are more responsible with other people's wallets than others. And they're supposed to review budgets and contracts, and they can be a lot more diligent about that as opposed to rubber stamping it. These things come through. When the LA Times expose hit last year, a lot of them were shocked, like to the point earlier, people making $180 an hour to read the news to find out who they needed to go attack. I mean, I had the TCA's community outreach person, who was recently fired after being hired just in November, call me and wanted to get together for coffee so we could talk. So she managed me, and it kind of went the other direction. But you can hold your officials accountable, because they will come back and they will give you a song and dance if they are pro TCA. They'll talk about how much money they have in the bank. They'll learn that they've spent $6 billion since 2000 on nothing, literally nothing. And as long as you can get your representatives who approve those budgets, it's a place to start. Cut out all these contractors. I mean, right now they're trying to line up a contractor to do financial projections. I think it was $250,000 or something. They have a CFO and they have a controller and they have other people in that department. I can do financial projections. I do them all the time. I do budgeting, do multi-million-dollar projects and such. I don't understand how a highly qualified CFO and a highly qualified controller can't sit down and do financial projections. These are not hard things to do. So get your local representatives to pay attention, and they can start canceling all those contracts. They can cancel all of them. They can look in them, they can call money back, look into the conflicts of interest, and that would be a start. That would start to deflate that balloon of money that they're just fire hosing around.
So your city council people are essentially sitting on the board, or they're represented on the board of the TCA. They have direct authority to influence TCA decisions.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Michelle, do you have any other ideas for what could be done to sort of shed some light on what's going on here with the TCA?
If I could wave a magic wand and we could make this all go away if 8 cities chose to vote at a board of directors meeting to pull out of the TCA agreement. Our old supervisor, Sean Nelson, said that the toll road, that the 91 is actually run by OCTA, not the TCA, that it takes OCTA 15 minutes a month to manage the toll road on the 91. I think that OCTA should take over, pay down the bonds with the toll revenue, cut the entire TCA staff, get rid of all the consultants, all the lobbyists, and 8 cities, if they pulled out, we would have less government. These agreements allow for just this spread and waste. And they're trying to get outside of their mission right now, so it seems like a really good time to be having a talk about what they should be doing.
And and look, I come from a background of working with special agents and auditors to investigate government entities and businesses like this, right? And so I think it would seem to me that we might want to take that as a first step. And I think there's been bipartisan legislation out there to do exactly that. So if we can get the attention back on that, I know a lot of things going on. It seems like that might be a good first step, right? In terms of then everybody would be working from the same numbers about what's really going on at the DCA.
Yeah. Yeah, if you've got contacts to start some investigations, let's get them in.
Well, hey, look, I think I need to be elected to something to do that. So I'll keep working on that angle. But I think for members of the public, right, we can just keep it on, keep pressuring our local elected officials, writing into our local papers if we can, keeping this as something that's on the forefront. Because again, this is our money, right? People are going to be tightening the belt straps here as we go through an economic downturn, and we don't need extra waste here by this government entity that was supposed to be not too long from now winding these things down and making them untold roads. So I think that's what we can all do, right? And I want to thank both of you for coming. I think this is a really interesting issue. We could talk for probably 3 hours about this, right? We're trying to fit it into 20, 25 minutes, but I think we hit the high points, and I really appreciate you coming. And maybe something will happen, right? We'll get back together again and talk about it again. There'll be some progress out there.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Shawn.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for your hard work, Michelle. Thanks for your time, Chris.
Definitely.